we can exclusively reveal that young British women, often apparently drunk, sometimes in state of undress, are being featured in adverts by people smuggling gangs. Now, sources claim the videos are being used to entice young males to use the services of gangs in travelling to Europe and the UK. This comes as a people smuggling gang has been jailed for 13 years for transporting Albanians to Europe. So, Reem, let me come to you on this. Obviously, this is disturbing stuff, that people smugglers are using essentially pictures of young women getting drunk in not a lot of clothes, using this as some kind of attraction to come to the UK. Is this, in your view, being used as bait? How worried are you about these sort of things when you see this?
I mean, look, it's incredibly disturbing, and we see with the statistics around sexual assault with these particular minority groups, that tends to be quite high. I will say, however, I don't think that the majority of people that come to this country illegally are coming here because they want to look at these young British women without a lot of clothing. I think that would be an unfair characterisation of the current situation. What it does show, however, is the callous nature of these criminal gangs, and it really does show that actually they are trying to entice young people to come over to this country, and actually they're not really there fleeing war. A lot of the time they are actually there for either economic reasons or alternative reasons, but this story really does show the callous nature of those particular criminal gangs.
Aaron, do you think women should be worried when they see these types of advertisements luring men over, showing them that there are British women in a state of undress, well, not undressed, wearing not a lot of clothes, let's be honest, going out clothes, clubbing clothes, basically. What we used to wear at university, Reem, probably, and inebriated, drunk, as some kind of showcase of why you might want to come to this country. I mean, if it's being used for these advertisements, surely that's what it's there for. It's a tricky one to talk about.
No, it's very disturbing. I mean, it's obviously a really important story to break. It never even occurred to me. Obviously, when you see the evidence of it, it makes perfect sense. I think what Reem said is quite right. The major incentives for people to come here, firstly, it's people seeking war, civil breakdown, maybe persecution. Also, economic migration is very real. I think it's really important to say this as well for your audience. There is a very thin line, I think, between economic migrants and people fleeing some of these countries. So the number 1 and 2 countries for people coming to the UK right now of the channel are Afghanistan and Iran. Those are countries subject to, economic sanctions. One was occupied for several decades. And I think it's perfectly possible for an Afghan to leave Afghanistan fleeing persecution, but also for quote-unquote economic reasons. I think that's a very important observation, but it does really get to the heart of how deplorable some of these people are. And I suppose for them, they view it as very cheap, quote-unquote advertising. But I agree, this will be very low down on the list of priorities for those making the journey, whether or not you would welcome them. I can't imagine it's a reason to go through mountains in Turkey, Iraq, and across the Channel.
Yeah, because the accusation when you talk about issues like this is that you're essentially saying that I'm saying that every man who crosses over in a dinghy is a threat to young women in this country, and I am not saying that at all. But if you have hordes of young men coming over, which we do have, is that more likely, as feminists say, that men can be misogynistic, they can behave in ways that put women under threat? Are we not making that risk of sexual violence worse by having such, people coming over in dinghies in such large numbers?
I think the data would indicate, that's an open question. What we do know is that the majority of sexual assault cases happen to a woman. They're actioned by a man that they would know or in their immediate social circles. It's very much a trope of being, violently attacked by a stranger in the middle of the night. Horrific, and you can understand why it captures people's imagination, but that's not what most sexual assault cases look like. In terms of the reality of this as well, I wonder, it's obviously true that people going to a new culture may not be as familiar with the habits of the people that they find themselves living with. And I think that's inevitably true for somebody coming from an ultra-conservative society like Afghanistan. But I wonder, why is this such an issue for people coming over here via the Channel and dinghies, and yet nobody's saying it with regards to the, I think last year we had net immigration of 600 and something thousand.
Well, it's interesting that you say that.
The vast majority of that was legal. So why are people not saying that about the legal migrants?
Well, I think people do say it,
and
but
also,
they don't say it on the airwaves,
okay.
Aaron.
And
I think it is something that people are worried about, clashes in culture, and it's a very difficult thing to talk about.
It's generally about asylum seekers, isn't it, though?
The accusations,
generally.
No, people discuss the worries about immigration of different cultures and how well they fit with British culture.
But fundamentally, the difference between legal and illegal migration is that with legal migration, we have their criminal records. We have their history. We know what they've been up to in whichever country they've come from. And that is the difference between the two. Obviously, when we're talking about asylum seekers, I don't think that the majority of asylum seekers that are coming to this country are sort of coming here for these particular reasons because they want to harm women. Of course, some of them will be, but I don't think the majority are. I think that mischaracterises the situation. Of course, many of them are coming for economic reasons. I will disagree with that, and I think that there isn't necessarily a fine line between economic migrants and those that are fleeing war. I think that if you're fleeing war, you're a genuine asylum seeker. You're fleeing. You're afraid for your life.
Well, I'll rephrase it. It's not a thin line, so to speak, but I think somebody might leave a country for more than one reason.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. Well, of course, if you're living under an authoritarian regime, the economic prospects in that kind of country aren't going to be very high. But I'm assuming that the number one reason why you leave the country is because you're afraid for your life.
But that's very true. One of what Reem said just before about how there is a difference between concerns of illegal immigration or those coming by irregular means and people who have had their visas checked, had their background checks before they arrive in this country. We don't know who a lot of the men are who are crossing.
Do you know how old they are?
That puts the risk up.
We don't know how old they are. Many of these, young people that are claiming to be under 18 are actually much older, and they end up coming to our schools. I mean, that in itself, I think, is a fear.
Well, very much so.